going. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today we're going to talk about the idea of building an ecosystem for teaching and learning for students. We have a wonderful guest who I'll introduce in a second here. But when you signed up, you may have noticed that the title was about building a student support ecosystem. But after Andrew, Dr. Feldstein and I talked a little bit, we thought that sometimes when people hear student support, their mind tends to go to things around student success or things around like advising and that area. But really, we're talking about something much bigger and like the entire student experience, including the learning that they're doing inside and outside of the classroom. So we retitled it a little bit today, but and I think you'll see why as we go through the presentation. We are recording this today, so we'll send out the recording afterward. My name is Katie Kapler. I am co-founder and CEO of Inscribe. And for those of you who are not familiar, Inscribe is a virtual community platform. We are designed to create spaces for students to connect with peers, faculty, and staff across their institution, so they can build relationships, get questions answered, and find the support they need anytime, anywhere. I'm also joined by my colleague today, Danielle Bonner, who is going to help monitor the chat. She's always empowered to interrupt us along the way. And really, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We'll make sure that we weave them into the conversation as we go. We'd also love to know who we have in the audience today. So if you want to just let us know who you are, where you're from, and if there's something that's, a question or an interest that you really have that you want to make sure that we touch on today, please put it in there and we will definitely talk about it as we go. But more importantly, I want to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Andrew Feldstein, who is one of my favorite participants to have in our webinars. Andrew is the Assistant Provost for Teaching Innovation and Learning Technology at Fort Hays State University. So a little background on him. For 15 years, Dr. Andrew Feldstein has been building university culture that not only supports disciplinary imperatives and career readiness, but also promotes self-determination, encourages curiosity, and emphasizes the value of relationships for students. His desire is to empower students, particularly those who are traditionally disadvantaged, and this was sparked early in his career while working for one of the HBCUs. This experience fueled his desire to help students discover and hone their ability to make meaningful connections to people, resources, and knowledge, and to be able to use those connections to build meaningful and sustainable life journeys. He is currently the Assistant Provost for Teaching Innovation and Learning Technology. And there at Fort Hays State University, he is working to build a learning ecosystem so faculty and students have the tools they need to co-create meaningful and engaging learning experiences. Andrew has a doctorate from Pace University and the Leuven School of Business. So welcome, Andrew.
Well, thank you. Great to be here.
I already went through this piece of the puzzle. So I think to kind of kick off the conversation today, Andrew, do you mind just telling, for those folks who aren't as familiar with Fort Hays State University, just a little bit about your institution and some of the things that makes it unique?
Sure, absolutely. Fort Hays State University is located in western Kansas. We're not in an urban area, we are in a very rural area, and have really three distinct groups of students that we serve. We serve approximately 4,000 students on our campus, mostly traditional, what we have been calling traditional students. We also have close to 7,000 students online from around the country and around the world. And we also have a third group of students that we serve, which is with two partner universities in China. We have approximately 4,000 students that we serve there as well. So a fairly diverse group of modalities there that really have both subtle and not so subtle differences in how we need to reach out and connect with our students and help them connect with us.
I'm muted. The diversity of your student population, I think, speaks to the need to sort of be creative and think sometimes about how you're engaging these student populations slightly differently depending on who they are.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it is in fact a challenge, and it's not necessarily one um, that's easily recognizable. It's easy to sort of fall into a trap of looking at our online student population versus our traditional students and thinking that they're really looking for a completely different experience, and that's not always the case. There are
Right.
always going to be differences, but there are also going to be similarities and things that we need to do in order to help them to be more connected.
Yes. And that is so resonant in thinking about, why we wanted to put this webinar together today and to talk to you, because there's so much conversation happening right now, like the challenges we face in higher education and post-secondary learning, and like what's the answer, what's the solution to this. And I think, as you and I have talked, and I think everyone probably on this webinar would agree, there isn't one answer, right? The solutions are as diverse as the student populations that we serve. And so it's less about finding the one thing that's going to solve the problem and more about, all right, how do we really embrace an ecosystem approach, like a multimodal approach to learning that's going to help all of our students have the experience that they're seeking. And that's what I'm so excited about, some of the stuff that you guys are doing at Fort Hays State. So I sort of set the stage there, but I'd love for you to talk a little bit about kind of what you're seeing in today's landscape in higher education, and some of the things that got your wheels turning about thinking about these things differently.
Well, I mean, it wouldn't be surprising to anyone to know that uh, all that we went through from the spring of 2020 forward has um, brought a lot of things into focus. A lot of things that we had considered to be, like I mentioned earlier, the sort of like this bifurcation between our online student population and our face-to-face students, and that they're different students and we deal with them differently, was, sort of a pretty standard way of doing it. And then, of course, um, COVID hit, and it sort of, in a way, leveled the playing field for our students, but not necessarily in a good way.
Mm.
It sort of created a situation where we now got to see the difference between experiences that students had um, online and experience students had face to face when we took things away or when things were taken away from us. Because now all of our face to face students, the ones that most of our faculty spend a lot of time with and are very familiar with, and they have a sense of who these students are, all of a sudden weren't in the same place. And reaching out to them became difficult. And they struggled with emergency remote teaching, and they struggled with various ways to reach that particular group. And during this process, we also started to gain an awareness that some of the struggles, some of the issues that our traditional on-campus students were having through the pandemic were in fact issues that our online students had been facing all along. And
Right.
some of them, and the needs were, a lot of the needs were the same. I mean, you're looking at the numbers here. Our online students are in fact by and large, the profile is a 35-year-old working mother, and that fits well within what you're looking at here, a lot of first generation certainly. And they have children, they have jobs, they have lots of other responsibilities. They can't we can't create a situation where we're saying, okay, you have to come to a synchronous online class at 10 o'clock every Monday, Wednesday, Friday morning, because that doesn't match with their experience. They have a lot of creative things that they need to do in order to make their education work for them.
Yeah.
Our job is to try to make that as easy as possible. And
Right.
one of the, one of the things we need to do, and that we'll sort of be talking about more here, is to help them connect. We have to provide the connection channels for those students to us, to our faculty, and to other students. These are things that our face-to-face students naturally get a chance to experience. They're in the same room with people. They're on the same campus. They can bump into each other in a hallway. Whereas our online student population, unless we intentionally go out and, as part of our teaching and learning ecosystem, build opportunities, bridges, scaffolds for them to connect with us and to one another, they're going to be at a disadvantage.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that you were influenced in your thinking about this problem a little bit by this book. Do you want to talk a minute about it?
This was a 2017 book written by Joseph Aoun, who's the president at Northeastern University. And this was a conversation around, I guess to summarize a little bit, when the robots take over, what are we humans to do? His point is that the robots aren't going to take over. But his point very strictly is that in an age where a lot of what human beings have been doing over the years in terms of their professions, things that involve straightforward decisions and basically data that can be a tree decision can be made saying if the data says this, press this button. If the data says that, press that button. All of those jobs that were once the province of people are going to go to artificial intelligence, which means that our responsibility in this changing environment is to provide our students with the types of skills that they're going to need in order to be successful moving into the future with the types of things that robots will never be able to do. So he talks about 4 higher level cognitive capacities, one of which is critical thinking, another of which is systems thinking, third he calls cultural agility, and the fourth is entrepreneurship. These are all things that humans can learn to do well that machines not so much. These are also the types of jobs that will be growing and developing over time, and these are the types of skills that we need to help our students to learn. These are sort of like the metacognitive skills. It is our responsibility to help develop lifelong learners. And I know that it's said a lot, but the world is changing rapidly. And if our students think that they're going to be able to get a job out of school and that job is going to remain static and they're going to be able to go through life doing whatever the initial job description said, that's not the case. And if they can't be flexible around this, if they can't think critically, understand systems and adapt and learn more as they go through life, they're going to be at a disadvantage.
Yeah, I'm sure that resonates with a lot of the folks that have joined us today. This idea that the instruction of students involves this extra, it's not just about the material and learning the material, it's about adapting, building all these skills that allow for adaptation. And there's a real intersection, I think, between that type of skill building and relationship building and the human beings that you're interacting with as part of the process. And I know that's something you talked about earlier, and something that became very top of mind for you during the pandemic, and you started to see some of the patterns that were emerging when you talked to your students about what was going on with them during that time of isolation. So I'd love to just go a little bit sort of from the big picture of, oh wow, there's all these things that we need to accomplish and solve, and then bring it down to the level of Fort Hays State and what you really were learning from your students during that time that kind of solidified for you what your next steps would be.
Sure. And a lot of what we learned came from 2 surveys that we sent out to students. The first survey, you're seeing a slide here, results of the the survey we gave to both our face-to-face and online students in the spring of 2020, just after the transition semester. And one of the things that we really wanted to know from them was how well we did at, I guess, keeping things together. You know, this particular question, they agreed that their instructors seemed understanding about unusual circumstances. Most of them agreed that their courses had remained consistent. And all that was really good news. But we also asked a qualitative question that sort of went beyond these more process-based questions, and in which we sort of asked, no, really, how did you do? How did you navigate taking your courses while we were in the throes of the first few months of the pandemic? And it was through the answers that they provided to that question that we really saw the first window into a into a divide between our students. You're seeing here some of the responses that we heard from students that really talked about how hard it was to stay motivated, the fact that they felt their mental health was deteriorating, that they were struggling with other issues, and without access to the library and other people to talk to, they were really having a hard time. Now, by and large, these responses came from our face-to-face students who had gone home and were experiencing their coursework and their education with what we've all become to term the emergency remote teaching process. And they were, in many ways, devastated by this and didn't quite know what to do. Now, on the other hand, there was a very different response that we got from our online student population. Now, our online students, in their responses, 13% of them talked about struggling with children at home and getting their work and their coursework done. 30% reported issues related to their job. 15% had internet or other resource issues. But what became the most meaningful number out of this entire survey was that 36%, fully 36% of our online students reported no difference. They said, yeah, no, things are the same, nothing changed. Whereas we only got that response from 5% of our on-campus students. Now, our first response was, okay, well, that's okay then. If they're reporting no change, then things are the same and we're doing okay there. Now, thankfully, that was only the initial response until we came to realize that that wasn't a good thing, that was actually a bad thing. And the fact that here's a group of students, so we have this almost control group, where we have a group of students that we've taken away their face-to-face learning and put them in a different environment where they're experiencing emergency remote teaching and totally online, and they're telling us that their motivation has disappeared and that they're lonely and that their mental health is deteriorating. And we have another group shrugging and saying, yeah, same stuff going on here. And it was only at that point that we came to realize that we have in fact been underserving that online population. Not provide the fact that that we switched environments and that they have been pretty much disconnected a lot before this, that it was, I mean, to me, it sort of changed my point of view on what we had to do. And this is when Katie and I started to have conversations around the types of things that we could do to build an environment where our online students could actually connect to us better. And not strictly within courses, because the responses we got from our face-to-face students were that one of the main responses that they missed the library.
Right.
And it wasn't the books that they missed. It was connecting with others and sort of even sitting in companionable silence next to someone and studying was really this something we may not have considered, but that was a real positive thing, and they were missing all of that.
Yeah, and this idea, I mean, kudos to you for thinking about this number, seeing this number, but thinking about it long enough to recognize that it's not necessarily a good thing that the online students are saying like business as usual. And I think it was the follow-up survey, I think we have some results here, where you asked a few additional questions that really brought that into stark, into stark relief about, oh, wow, these online students have never had access to any of these things that our in-person students hold and cherish so closely.
Right, and that was, we started thinking a lot about this in terms of social capital, and so the following May of 21, where and we had and the students had all been still undergoing either online or emergency remote teaching for the entirety of that, we launched another survey, and this survey had a couple of parts to it. One was we utilized the community of inquiry survey to get a better understanding of their online experience, but we also asked a series of questions around their social capital, their connection to resources, their connections to one another. This particular question, and we asked during a typical semester, and outside of required course activities, how many classmates do you typically connect with to discuss course-related subjects? And if you look at the numbers here, you'll see that the top are the on-campus students, and fully 80% of the on-campus students were communicating with one or more of their classmates around topics related to the course. The bottom line is our online students, and when asked the question, only 40% connected with one or more of the other students. So we're looking at 3 times as many of our online students connected with no one, as opposed to our face-to-face students.
Right.
Which was, to me, was a really eye-opening number.
Right. And then this one, which I mean, honestly, sort of breaks my heart when I see these numbers about just that opportunity for engagement.
Right, and this is asking a very similar question, but now we asked, okay, so let's forget about course-related subjects. How many of your classmates did you connect with around other subjects, things that weren't directly related to a specific course? Once again, the number for our on-campus students is fully 80% connected with one or more students. And now we're down to, for our online students, fully 80% connected with no one.
Yeah. And again, sort of to bring it back to this idea that education is so much more than just the content that you're learning in the classroom, but it really is the social capital, which I think is a great word, that you're building along the way. The idea of learning how to build these relationships and navigate them in management is part of the larger skill set. And so you can start to identify this gap that in the online student experience that has real ramifications for the student while they're at school, but then, potentially beyond as well. So now you have this huge mess of things to deal with, a complicated conundrum. So let's talk a little bit about the concept of a teaching and learning ecosystem, what that means to you, and then we'll kind of dig into a little bit about how you're starting to build that and embrace that at Fort Hays State.
Sure. I mean, and when we talk about a teaching and learning ecosystem, there's a lot of different levels. As this diagram is showing here, a lot of our focus tends to be on the classroom. And even the questions that I posed in the previous surveys, a lot of those questions were based on the student experience in the classroom. However, if you're looking at the totality of the experience for our face-to-face students, it's only a percentage of their time that's actually in a classroom. They are immersed, particularly the ones that are on campus, they're immersed in the university atmosphere. They are surrounded by fellow students, they're surrounded by faculty, they're surrounded with this whole university educational context. And so there's lots of moving parts to that. There's the library, as I mentioned, there's the union, there are dormitories and the quad and all sorts of places where students can both intentionally and serendipitously connect with one another to have conversations. And to maybe it wasn't, you're walking across campus and you see a student that's in one of your classes and you weren't intentionally planning on seeking them out and you hadn't intentionally had a question that you were going to ask, but you see them in your mind, it prompts you to think about something, which turns into a question, which you then say hello, ask the question, and you start having a conversation, which might possibly be a very rewarding conversation that would have to do with maybe you're both struggling in the class, or maybe you both had a similar question about a previous day's lecture, and you can unpack that with one another. And so when you think about creating an environment, a similar type of environment for your online student population, one of the questions that comes up is, how do you not just build opportunities for students to connect in a course, connected specifically to individual course activities, but how do you provide students with places, opportunities? And when I say places, I'm thinking abstract places as well as physical places where they can actually connect on their own terms, in their own time, to talk about things that are important that they really never had the opportunity to talk to anyone about before.
Yeah. And the place where I, like in my own personal experience, where I feel this acutely is in the transformation of the conferences that we all went through as well during the same time frame, right? Where you move to the online conference and the content is all there and the content is great, but I don't get to run into that person I've been seeing for 2 years in the hallway, and they don't get to introduce me to somebody that, oh, you guys would, get along so great or have some similar interests. So I think we've all felt that acutely and can appreciate how in the online learning environment, how that could be missing for those students as well. But there was more to, oh yeah, sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
No, I was just going to say your conference example is a really good example, because if you think about a conference, I'm sure that we've all had a similar experience of walking into a session because the title of the session was really cool and it promised to be really exciting, and then 5 minutes in we realized that they were really talking about something else. But so quietly walking out of the room and somebody else walking out with you.
Right.
Online, you just leave and you find another session to go to. In
Right.
person, you walk out, you look at each other, and both said, "That wasn't what I expected. I was looking for this." And then you have this really nice, robust conversation around the topic that you thought the session was going to be about. You exchange information, you connect, maybe you do research together, but it's an opportunity for relationships, for community building, for us to be able to connect in very real, less formal ways.
Absolutely. And I know as you're thinking about for your university, when you start to think about how to replicate this, you're also thinking about, like what are some of the core tenets that you want to make sure that that experience lives up to or encapsulates?
Absolutely. In our university mission, we are, our goal as with many universities, is to sort of build the next generation of engaged global citizens that'll hopefully help us save the world. That last part's not in our mission, but it's, and so part of, the values are there, the values of connection, the values of the fact that we've had an online program for an awful long time. We are housed in Western Kansas, which in and of itself is a place of very sparse population density and where connection becomes more important. Alternate ways to sort of teach our students different ways to connect with one another, to be able to communicate and engage in meaningful ways. And it's important for us to be able to model that, for us to be able to show that how that can be done in various ways to be accomplished, because it's a skill set that's important.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that, complementing the university living up to your mission, unspoken or not, making sure that that continues to align can be a really tricky thing. So your vision toward building this ecosystem comes with some requirements for people who are going to participate in that ecosystem as well, right? It's not just let's throw literally everything we can at it and see what sticks. I think you've been quite intentional about how you go about building these partnerships. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And this is really a key that we tend to struggle with. I mean, the world of ed tech is burgeoning, and I don't think that's a exaggeration at all. There's all sorts of people that are coming up with lots of different solutions. And I think that there are a number of things that I needed to consider when I was thinking about the folks that we wanted to be able to partner with in order to help us create this meaningful, connected environment for our students. And because that was one of the primary objectives, was to be able to build that environment, we really needed to look beyond classroom processes and look at more of the third space processes that we've been talking about, and what happens when you walk out in the hall and get a chance to talk to someone, or what happens if you meet somebody walking across campus. These are things that how do we create an infrastructure? How do we create creating opportunities? I know is sort of an abstract thing. It's much easier to say, go to point A and connect to point B, but that's not necessarily how the world works.
Yeah.
A lot of what happens in the world is built on informal relationships. It's built on giving people, and our students in particular, options and different opportunities based upon what they're looking for, based upon who they are, to be able to look at different channels and different ways to connect.
Yeah.
And because they don't have the means to make those connections on their own like our on-campus students do, we need to be able to scaffold and help them build those environments. I'm going to just pop off to the community of inquiry for just a second and talk about something that's termed social presence. And social presence is considered to be part of the learning process. It's something that we don't necessarily have to talk about when we're on campus in a class, because social presence exists if you're in a room with someone. Body language, tone of voice, volume, posture, all sorts of things. Just seeing people in proximity with you signals that you're in the same place. So as an instructor in a face-to-face classroom, I don't have to point out to the students, these are other students sitting next to you. If you want to talk to them, you're free to talk to them, because we all know those channels and they all exist. Our online students, we have to intentionally build the social presence. We have to build these channels so that we create opportunities for students when and how they choose to be able to communicate with one another. And there's no one ed tech tool out there that's going to accomplish all of that.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Right. I mean, I agree, and I've seen some conversation in the chat too about, well, I saw someone mention introverted folks. Like introverted folks like to engage and interact and are going to be more comfortable doing that in an authentic way differently than people who are really extroverted and want to be out there. And so you have to provide the variety of opportunities that's going to allow everybody to show up and be able to do it in a way that they're comfortable. And that's when we talk about things like belonging and establishing all that. The word that comes up over and over for us is this word authentic. Like you can't tell people like go belong, show up here and talk to people and it will work out, right? It has to be something that they come to the table willing and wanting to do, and like with some agency over that process.
right.
So
And that's why I
yeah,
talk about it's about providing the opportunities rather
yeah,
than
right.
structuring the interactions.
That's dictating the opportunities. So today we were gonna.
Katie, before we go on to that, we do have a question in the chat that I'd like to address, if that's possible. Cool. So Andrew, how do you involve faculty when implementing these technologies?
Well, yes. Yes, do we. I mean, we have our team is constantly interacting with faculty, whether it's through professional development, through developing courses, or just faculty looking for various solutions that they can use within their courses. Now, there are things that, because none of the pieces of the puzzle that can be used within a course are going to go very far if faculty don't feel that they're useful.
Right.
And so, and whether they're not going to meet their goals and their needs. Most of what we're looking at, and you're looking at three different really cool ed tech products, including our host today at Inscribe here, because one of the things we look at, I mean, we have to look at faculty adoption. Things have to make sense in terms of their experience with students. They have to make sense in terms of being easy to use and to implement, and easy to integrate and design into their courses. Otherwise, it's not going to work very well. There are tools, however, and the Inscribe platform really formed two functions for us. One are the in-course community, the in-class communities that faculty can create, but we also built an overarching community that allows for the sort of conversations that we've been talking about for the first half of this discussion, where students can actually, on their own, have a place where they can connect with one another outside of the course, just with other students, to talk about stuff.
Yeah.
Stuff is a technical term.
Well, I love this slide too, because I mean, I'm from Inscribe. I'm going to say all great things about Inscribe, but I also know there are amazing and wonderful complementary education products in the market that we're really excited about and interested in, and see opportunities for our own solution to integrate with or live alongside them in a way that makes the experience even better. And so, it's nice to be able to have that conversation with an institution that it's not like one or the other, right? It's about bringing them together to create a more powerful overall solution. And you mentioned this room. I think we're going to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to talk briefly about each of these three to give a sense of what we're, the types of things that we're thinking about, because there are a lot of ed tech tools out there that are designed to deliver content. These are not none of these and some of the others that we're bringing in are actually designed to deliver content. They're more designed to promote processes and scaffold connections and learning. One of the interesting things about these three in particular is there are three very interesting pieces going on here. If you look at Inscribe and somebody mentioned introverts a while ago, and introverts, in my experience, enjoy asynchronous communities, and they enjoy being able to go in their own space and time. And once they feel safe in the community, they feel comfortable in contributing. I remember years ago I had a hybrid course, and I had a student who did not say a word in class, but we had an online blog that was following their project through the semester. The number one contributor on that blog, central to the entire process, was this one person that said not a thing in class. So asynchronous environments are powerful, and they're powerful ways for students, particularly those that are all working in different timelines and different mindsets, to be able to connect with one another. To go over to the other side, synchronous still remains important. And we have been sort of shown a very interesting kind of rigid way to do synchronous as we all got immersed into Zoom over the past few years and put into boxes and such. But InSpace is an amazing platform that sort of gives participants within an open meeting space the agency over what they do and where they go and who they talk to. Yeah, here it is. So you're looking at, you can create whatever background you want. It has this neat thing which looks at proximity and audio, and you can see the little groupings here. The students in the top group on the left are having a conversation. The students that are in the bottom left are having another conversation. But they're different conversations, and they're not hearing one another because of the way the proximity audio works. And the really cool thing would be is if one of these people in the bottom got bored and they wanted to join the top group, they could just sort of walk away, join the people in the top, and they would now be part of that conversation. So that's only a little fraction of the type of interactivity that can occur in an environment like this. So it really allows for an awful lot of opportunity to put students in an environment where they feel free to walk around.
Yeah, right. So you covered a lot of the content, Andrew, we had coming up. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing too right now with asynchronous communities, kind of where you are? Because I'd love to set the stage for that, because I think that will then be useful in talking about where you're going, which is actually integrating these solutions into something that works together.
Well, and top of mind, of course, is a conversation between Inscribe and InSpace, because having a really powerful way to combine synchronous and asynchronous into student interactions is really an exciting possibility. One of the things, and we did not mention it really much, is our Tiger to Tiger community, which is built exclusively in Inscribe at this point, which we put into play in February of 2021 as an embedded community within our Blackboard environment. So students who have single signed on to Blackboard can just click right into their Tiger to Tiger community and hang out with one another. And this is what that community looks like. When we designed it, when Katie and I sort of put this all together, I had it in my mind that this would be a great place for our face-to-face students and our online students to hang out. As it turns out, it's by and large our online population all the way. And the need for it became really clear when we started seeing some of the responses when students first got into this environment. and they proclaimed where they were from, and we had students from Nepal and California and North Carolina and all over the place. And then the next wave was students saying, hey, I've been in this program for years, will you be my friend? And, you know, it was showing a real need for students wanting to be able to make these connections. And not all students do, but by the people that were in here were, I mean, you could sense that they had been waiting for this opportunity. And they're really, and they're enjoying it. It's also, and I don't know if you have the slide about the age slide.
You know what? I don't. I was looking for that one too, but we can speak to it. There's this one, which I also thought was great, but yes.
Sure.
Tell that story, because I think that's a great one.
Yeah, one of the most important conversations that I think that has taken place in this community was back in, it was in October of 21, and that semester was particularly hard for a lot of people. And a student went into the community and posted under the subject line, "Am I too old?" And she explained how frustrating it had been for her, and it was a hard semester, and she worked harder than she'd ever worked, and maybe it was because maybe she was just too old for this. People jumped in to the conversation to reassure her and to say, no, you're not. And, you know, people went in and said, I've been in this program for X amount of time. I'm 52 years old. You're not too old. And so to see the types of reassurance that she got was really heartwarming. The other thing that was incredibly important was, because this community has most of the features and affordances of most good social learning, social network communities, we know how many people viewed that post. And we know that within a couple of weeks, over 300 students had actually viewed that series of posts. And in my mind, and actually one of the students who had responded to her said, this was a question I've been meaning to ask. And so I'm thinking, maybe this is a question a lot of people had been meaning to ask. And now we have 342 students who have viewed this post and have perhaps gotten some reassurance that no, in fact, you're not too old. And maybe they decided to stick around in a situation where they may have otherwise decided not to. So this type of conversation, I mean, totally valuable. I saw a tiny bit of a comment in the chat as it flew by, where someone asked about supervision in the community. We do not supervise this community. This is a student community. It's designed for students. Their access to it is through the student-facing Blackboard, and there have been people over, you know, who have asked me, well, what happens if terrible things happen and people start flaming one another? And we have been February 21, it is now July 22, what are we, 18 months in? I can tell you that we have not had anything other than civil, positive conversations taking place in the community.
You just answered all three questions that came into the chat right there. Did you see them coming in?
I just saw, I tend not to look at chat because once I look at chat, I've lost my thread. And
you did great. You did great. Yeah. So some of the questions that we had come in regards to who is a moderator in this type of community, how do students access it? You mentioned Blackboard. And then there's just a concern about, are students going to complain about faculty in these communities?
Yeah.
right.
There was one other, oh, sorry, go ahead, Andrew. Then there's one other I was going to have you touch on.
Yeah, no, I was just going to, a funny story about moderators. When we started the community, I was concerned that there may need to be moderators. So we gave a couple of our student workers moderator roles so that they could then, if necessary, say, oh, there's a problem here or there. What happened was we found out very quickly that students ignored moderators. They didn't want to, and in fact, in a couple of instances, faculty went in to engage and ask questions. You can always tell faculty speak. And so faculty posts were also ignored.
Students wanted, in this community, students wanted to talk to each other. So well, no, we're doing good. So there was one question that came up about how do you get this, how did you get the momentum going? Like, how did you get students into the community, get them to feel like it was their space and that they owned it? Any tips or tricks for that?
Well, I mean, the first thing we did was we reached out to a lot of groups, including the folks in student affairs. We were having we were transitioning to Workday as our student registration platform. And so I asked a couple of the students that had been working on that project if they would step in every once in a while, and if those questions came up, they could help. I talked to the library and asked if some of their students wouldn't mind monitoring every once in a while, and if they identified some trends they might have identified on campus, and that they thought were interesting, that they would maybe post and help answer similar questions or identify and point out those trends to other students. I asked the honors group to go in and spend a little bit of time. But for the most part, it's taken off organically. What we are going to be doing, and one of the prime projects this fall in which we're hoping to use this community as well as with an integration from InSpace in, is to do a virtual online orientation for our new online students and to build that in the community. Look at that. And so, which to me is going to be this amazing choreography between asynchronous support and conversations and synchronous events that can sort of create this really cool interplay so that students can benefit from each other's contributions by looking at the conversations. And the network, we're planning on adding resources, both video resources and print resources for all the students. So this is a project we still got a month or so to get this all
No problem.
nailed down. So yeah,
Not worried at all. Yeah, so I'm really excited about, and that again just kind of goes back to this idea of letting students engage in the modality and the ways that feel safe and appropriate for them. I did see a couple of this. So I'm going to just touch on a few things in the chat that are a little tangential, but Tiffany, I saw your post about the type of community, and as Danielle said, at Fort Hays, they were very intentional about creating what we would call sort of a student-to-student community for students by students. There are definitely examples, and we're starting to do some additional work with Fort Hays around building communities that have a slightly different goal, like an academic or learning community that's really around a particular course or subject. Those communities have a different personality, I would say. Faculty tend to be much more active in those communities. Students engage with faculty very differently in that type of space than they do in this more social space. So the way you design your community and the way you present it kind of has a lot to do with the type of engagement that you see in there and that you can expect in there. And then I think it was it David or Daniel? David, who mentioned, I think, it was Stephanie. Yeah, we're all like social media, the way students or anybody behaves on social media, I think you'll see is very different than how they behave in these social spaces that they're accessing from their school network. We just see over and over again that it's not an anonymous community. I am bringing my academic self to this space. And what Fort Hays's experience was in terms of really the content being very positive, very uplifting, is what we see replicated over time. Now, with that said, we do have some tools built into the platform to capture and address if there was a post or an interaction that wasn't appropriate to the norms of the community. And so if you want to reach out, we can go deeper on that. But so we appreciate that that's a concern, and we build tooling into the system to account for that, but it really doesn't happen. People tend to bring their best selves to those spaces.
You made a really good point about design, and because again, any of the platforms are just platforms until we do something with them. And so it's how you design it that really signals how it's used. To go back to, we very intentionally linked this through the students' Blackboard homepage. We felt and we believe it worked with signaling this, the direct association with their academic life. And through that, you know, if they were in Blackboard, they're there for a very specific purpose. Going to the community has them in that mindset and in that frame. And that's the tone of the conversations has been based upon that. But a lot of the success of what we've had with Tiger to Tiger, and what we hope we continue to have as we start to integrate some of these tools together, is going to be based upon making sure that we have what our goals are for these communities, to make those very clear and to build processes, workflows that are designed to signal that that's what the community is and what the affordances that are immediately available are, so that it sort of moves behavior and activity in a certain way.
100%. So I know we're getting close to the top of the hour, and I want to be conscious of time. So if there's any additional questions or comments, please put them in the chat. Great conversation in the chat throughout the presentation. I loved, you know, of course, interaction and collaboration is near and dear to our hearts. So thank you, everybody, for sharing your ideas and your feedback and your questions. Of course, I'm going to skip over that. A huge thank you to Dr. Feldstein for joining us today. I learned something every time we talk, Andrew. It blows my mind, and I'm so excited for the work that we have coming up this fall. It's going to be a great project.